drive back was silent, the tension in the car thick and oppressive. Sarah stared out the window, her mind replaying what had just happened over and over. That thing in the wardrobe, it wasn't just some trick of the light or a figment of her imagination. It was real. She could still feel its eyes. Even though it had no face, Ben gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror as if expecting to see something chasing them. Jake, sitting in the passenger seat, stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. None of them spoke. What could they even say? As they reached the outskirts of town, Ben finally broke the silence.
We have to tell someone, the police, maybe.
And tell them what? That we went into a haunted house and a shadow chased us? They'll think we're crazy.
Ben didn't respond, but his grip on the wheel tightened even more. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe they were crazy. Maybe they'd imagined the whole thing. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She'd felt it. Felt the cold, the fear, the unnatural presence that had stalked them through the house. Suddenly, the car jerked to the side, skidding slightly as Ben swerved to avoid something in the road.
What the hell?
Ben slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. For a moment, they sat there, hearts racing, trying to figure out what had just happened.
Did you see that? There was something in the road.
I don't see anything.
Sarah's pulse quickened. She peered out the window. The road ahead was empty, bathed in the dull glow of the car's headlights. But beyond that, in the darkness, she thought she saw something, just a shadow, standing on the edge of the trees.
It's here. It followed us.
What are you talking about?
Before she could answer, the headlights flickered. For a split second, the road plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the shadow was there. Standing directly in front of the car, Ben screamed, slamming his foot on the gas pedal. The tires squealed as the car shot forward, but the shadow didn't move. It stayed there, unmoving, as the car barreled toward it. And then, just before they hit it, it disappeared. The car swerved again, narrowly avoiding the ditch on the side of the road. Ben wrestled with the wheel, finally bringing the car to a stop. The three of them sat in stunned silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps.
We need to get out of here.
Ben nodded, putting the car back in gear. They drove in silence for the rest of the way, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still there, lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. When they finally reached Sarah's house, she practically leapt out of the car, her legs shaking beneath her. She turned to Jake and Ben, her eyes wide.
Don't tell anyone about this. Not yet. We need to figure out what's going on first.
Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded reluctantly. Ben just stared at the steering wheel, his face pale.
We'll talk tomorrow.
Sarah added before turning and heading up the walkway to her front door. She could feel their eyes on her as she fumbled with her keys, her hands trembling. When she finally got the door open, she slipped inside, locking it behind her. The house was quiet, dark. Her parents were asleep, oblivious to the terror that had followed her home. Sarah made her way upstairs, every creak of the floorboards making her heart race. She didn't feel safe. Not here, not anywhere. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't. Bound to the Whitmore house. It had followed them, and now it was out there somewhere. In the darkness, she reached her bedroom and closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment to steady herself. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. What had they seen in that house? Why had the wardrobe felt so wrong? And what was that thing that had come out of it? As she crossed the room to her bed, something caught her eye. Her reflection in the mirror on her dresser looked off. She stopped, staring at it. The room behind her was dark, but her reflection seemed darker. Her eyes sunken, her skin pale. She stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. That's when she saw it. In the mirror, behind her reflection, the wardrobe stood. The same wardrobe from the Whitmore house, impossibly out of place in her bedroom. The doors were slightly ajar, just like before, and from the darkness inside, something shifted. Sarah spun around, but her room was empty. There was no wardrobe, just her dresser and the familiar shadows of her belongings. She turned back to the mirror, but the image was gone. Her reflection was normal again. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the silence. She grabbed it, her hands shaking. It was a message from Jake. "We need to talk. I saw it too. In my room," Jack said to Sarah. Sarah's blood ran cold. She glanced at the mirror again, her heart pounding in her chest. The wardrobe might be gone for now, but she knew knew it wasn't over, that shadow, that thing from the house. It wasn't bound by walls or distance. It had found them, and it wasn't going to stop until it had them all across town. The Whitmore house stood silent and still, its door slightly ajar, waiting for the next curious soul to wander inside. The sky was bruised with swirls of deep purples and grays as Amelia clutched her coat tighter around her. The wind clawed through the skeleton trees, their bony fingers scratching against one another like they were trying to whisper secrets. Halloween was approaching, and the air seemed thick with something Amelia couldn't quite name.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Her friend Sarah asked, voice barely above a whisper. Amelia nodded, casting a cautious glance back at the others. Mike and Tom exchanged uneasy glances, the flickering of their flashlights casting eerie shadows over their faces. They had all grown up hearing stories of Blackwood Manor, an old Victorian house that loomed at the end of Sparrow Hill. No one dared to go there, not since the stories started about the missing people, strange sightings, and eerie noises that echoed out of its empty windows at night. But now, at 17 and full of bravado, Amelia and her friends had decided to spend Halloween night there, not just to walk around, but to stay until dawn. They crested the hill, the manor rising from the earth like some twisted memory, dark and decaying. The windows gaped like empty eye sockets, and a cold draft seemed to seep from its very walls, even from a distance. A thick layer of mist hugged the ground around it, swirling around their ankles as they moved closer. Mike was the first to reach the door, fingers trembling as he pushed it open. The hinges screamed in protest, echoing through the emptiness inside. Amelia felt her skin prickle. The stories said that those who entered Blackwood Manor never came out the same. Inside, the air was stifling. Dust motes swirled in the light of their flashlights, and the smell of rot was overpowering. The floorboards creaked under their feet as they stepped inside. Sarah stayed close to Amelia, her fingers digging into her friend's arm.
Let's just look around.
They split up, each taking a different part of the house. Amelia moved down a narrow hallway, her light sweeping over peeling wallpaper, fragments of picture frames, and furniture draped in dust-covered sheets. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the first door she found. It was a bedroom. The bed was stripped bare, but the shape of a body seemed imprinted on the mattress, as though someone had been lying there for far too long. She shivered, pulling her flashlight up to examine the wall above the bed. Strange, jagged scratches covered the plaster, forming words in a language she didn't understand. Just as she was about to turn back, something moved in the corner of her vision. Her flashlight flickered, and she froze, trying to convince herself it was her imagination. But then, it moved again, a shadow, blacker than any shadow she'd ever seen, stretching and shifting along the wall as if alive.